A very warm welcome. You are watching Bottom Line KE right here on Lookup TV. Now, Kenya is a multi-party state with numerous parties, and during electioneering period, they come together to form coalitions. Today on Bottom Line KE, we're looking at coalition party politics in Kenya, which has for a long time had undertones of ethnicity. To help me discuss this issue today is Patrick Mwenda, who is a youth leader.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So looking at coalition parties in Kenya, they date back from 1963 when KANU, which had Jaramogi, Kenyatta and Tomboya, merged with KADU, which was being led by Moi and Martin Shikuku. So that is the very first time there was a coalition. And during that time, so that is 1963, just at the time when Kenya was gaining independence, what was the nature or the attitude of political parties coming together at that time?
Thank you. Probably you allow me to take a trip down memories and try to look at what was the genesis of coalitions in our country. Because if we start by looking at it from the inception of independence, we may lose some history about coalitions. I think we have a long history about coalitions in our country as far as governance is concerned, because looking back at the colonial era when the white people came to our country, way back in 1880 something, I think 1888, when East Africa was being ruled by a group called the Imperial British East African Company. They are the first people who took governance of East Africa, and they had their own intentions. One way being heading of slavery in Africa and around East Africa. But then we have to look at it when the Imperial British East African Company was taking leadership of East Africa. More particularly in our country, Kenya, we look at it like when the British government came to now start the colonialism in our country. How did they partner with the Imperial British East African Company? There was some coalition they developed, each of them with an interest at hand. They had a coalition that they formed between the company and the Britons, the British government. British government were purely interested in exploiting our minerals and other things and colonizing our country. So they formed a coalition based on, we are doing this and you guys are doing this. So let's partner and see how best we can execute this. Then from there, after the collapse of the Imperial British East African Company, there came British government. They wanted to build railway from Mombasa to, I think, to the lakeside. They had to partner with Indians. They went and took the Indian labor who came now to help in construction of the railway. So they partnered, each one of them with an interest. That the British wanted to build the railway, and then they partnered with the Indians who wanted a place to keep their surplus population in the country. India was becoming populated, and that was one of the main coalitions that was formed in our country. Now, if we try to look down at history, there is a lot of coalition that came even before independence.
So Kenyans could actually see these coalitions happening even way before we got independence.
It is purely, Kenya is purely established on coalitions. Our governance is so much full of coalitions that have been happening in our country. Now, if we look at the inception of independence now, after we had a lot of coalitions during the colonial era. Now, let's come to the inception of independence, where now we had become a country of our own and we had our own independence. The first coalition was between Mzee Kenyatta and Moi. Of course, each one of them had his own interest. Why did Kenyatta and Moi had to form a coalition and spearhead the governance of our country? After Kenyatta fell apart with Oginga Odinga, Moi had to come in place with his political party, which was KANU. Of course, to some extent, history tells us Moi had to shelve the ideologies of KANU. But then, do we see underneath there was some sort of emancipation of KANU policies in the governance of KANU? So the coalition that was formed between Moi and Kenyatta, so that they can lead, one as president, the other one as vice president, as much as there was KANU that was leading, there was some sense in which KANU trying to incorporate their people in the governance of the Kenyatta leadership. So purely, you look at it like what informs our coalitions in the country. We have, to some extent, people may think that coalitions are formed on country interest at heart. But literally, coalitions are informed on short-lived interest of individuals.
And what really should coalitions be about?
Sorry?
What should coalitions really be about?
The main aim of a coalition should be to bring the whole country on board, because one is likely to think that when one person is in governance or one party is in governance, we are likely to shelve off the ambitions of other people and aspiration of other communities or certain group of social class. So the main purpose of a coalition should be to bring everyone on board on leadership. But then that is not the case in our country.
So does that mean then a coalition has to factor in all tribes and factor in interests of different people from different counties in this country?
True to say,
will that then be a perfect coalition?
Yeah, true to say, that should be the main phase of a coalition. But then we really realize that. We really realize such issues in a coalition. We end up forming coalitions that are purely centered on short-lived interests, on what are we getting as individuals, not as a community. But mainly, you look at it like, of course, we cannot underscore, or we cannot just brush the importance of coalition and the benefit they are bringing to our country. To some point, to me, I would say they kind of tend to reduce tribal animosity, because you realize that any coalition has some tribal outlook in it. For example, the coalition between Moi and Kenyatta, one would look at it, it was a Kalenjin affair versus Kikuyu affair. As much as it has that outlook of tribal part, but then do we achieve in reducing tribal animosity? Of course, yes, because the big tribes feel
there's that inclusion.
They're included in the governance. So to some extent, coalitions help in reducing tribal animosity, especially among the big tribes. Because of course, when you talk about tribalism, it is so much pronounced by the big communities. The young communities, they more often than not don't pronounce their tribal part. But then the big communities are the ones that seem to pronounce tribal issues around the country. So when you have a coalition, and you notice that each coalition tries to capture in the big communities. So in that essence, we reduce the animosities that can come up all along with big communities being left out in governance.
And if we talk about inclusion, then this boils down to political parties. Because then how should political parties be formed? Are they formed just purely on tribal lines? Or of course, if then political parties are inclusive, then we wouldn't have a problem when it comes to coalition. If we have two parties that are both, they have a national appeal, coming together, so it won't feel like these are two tribes which are coming to take power.
Now I think in that sense we have to ask ourselves what brought up the issue of multipartism. Sometimes back we discussed about multipartism, and we realized that multipartism was brought up by the need of inclusion of different communities. Some were feeling they are being left out. Now, when we came up to multipartism, more particularly around 1992, that is when multipartism was pronounced in our country, most of the political parties did not attain national outlook. They did not attain national outlook. So in that case, we cannot run away from the fact that our political parties are more often than not tribal. So in any case, if the foundations of coalitions are political parties, and then them themselves are built on tribal issues, then we cannot run away from the fact that coalitions are formed on tribes. But then that is not the true aspect of how coalitions be formed or political parties should be formed. If anything, during the inception of multipartism, I wish there was a way that they would have now killed the outlook, the creation of parties in terms of tribes. But then now that we found ourselves into it, then we cannot run away from the fact that because we found our way into formation of parties which are purely based on tribes, then coalitions will definitely be formed on tribes, and we cannot run away from that.
Okay, and maybe looking at other nations, why is it so hard for Kenya to be inclusive?
Why is it so hard for Kenya to be inclusive?
Is it because from the onset, the genesis of it all, already it was segmented along those tribal lines, ethnic lines?
There is a book written by a guy called Niccolo Machiavelli. It's called The Prince. That book recounts that when people are in power, they will do everything at their position to ensure they remain in power, including selling the bad ideas to the people, provided they will buy it. It also says that if they're out of power, they will do everything at their hands to ensure they come to power. So our politics are purely informed by, or they are directed by, the big people, or they know who knows who in the country. Now, they're trying to sell the ideas to Kenyans. Of course, some are trying to sell the ideas to Kenyans. But do Kenyans buy real ideas, or they're just seeing the tune of tribalism? Now, if Kenyans have gotten to a point, the leaders can see Kenyans want to listen the tune of tribalism, then definitely they will do it to the, whatever it is on their hand to sell the tribal thing, so that they can remain into power, regardless of whether the powers are helping the community or not. So the hardest thing that we're experiencing in our country to achieve an outlook that is not tribal, it's because our population has so much been intoxicated into the belief of without tribes, we are not being helped. That is why any political party that comes up, you find from the onset, it will be saying that this one belongs to a certain tribe, especially based on who is the leader of that political party. So Kenyans have now been brainwashed to some extent that a political party is based on a tribe, and therefore the leaders have learned that. And because they want to remain in power, then they have to sing the tune of tribalism. So it's very hard for us now to realize, because our population has just been conformed to live by that norm.
Okay, and looking at what the Deputy President said about a week or so ago, and he said that it's only him and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga who have parties that have a national appeal. Do you think the sentiments are correct?
Well, of course, to some extent, on the public part of it, their parties seem to appeal to as national parties. But if you look into details,
like people beyond their respective tribes.
If we try to look into inner circle of each of their parties, we would ask ourselves, as much as certain their political parties are showing out the national outlook, but the inner circle of it is purely managed by a certain tribe. Because let us look at the big wings around the ODM. Akina Orengo. Raila is a Luo, Orengo is a Luo. The voice of Orengo can never be underscored anywhere in the affairs of ODM. So, as much as they may sing of, we have parties that have the national outlook, it just remains a shadow of imaginations, not the reality of the matter. Because again, you look at it, when you come to the side of Deputy President, anytime we have elections, we are promised that his party will score in his own background. The excuse they will come out, they will start, when they fail, they start now insulting the other or castigating the other political parties, in the sense that they are based on tribes or their village political parties. But then where is their political party scoring? It is scoring in a background. So what now can hinder Kenyans from thinking this is a political party which is built on a tribe? Because, for example, the other day we had elections, different areas of the country.
The by-elections.
The by-elections, yes. The Deputy President fielded different candidates in different parts of the country.
Across the country.
But we ask ourselves, one, they win. They only won in Rift Valley. One word in Nakuru, that is Rift Valley. So definitely.
But he argued that he got substantial votes even in the areas that he did not win. So this proves that his party is popular across people of different tribes.
But is that democracy? Democracy will always go by majority. So as much as they won, then they got a massive number of votes from different areas. They didn't win. So that tells you the only place they can win is a place where they enjoy their tribe affairs. Only in Rift Valley. So at the end of the day, any tribe is purely based on certain region. And that is why you find that when we come now to formation of coalitions, we have to look into, my political party is famous in Rift Valley. And then they will come up with someone else who has a political party which is famous in another region that is that has got a majority of votes. For example, nowadays, as you speak of any coalition, people are thinking about how do we merge Rift Valley and Mount Kenya so that at least we can have those majority votes. So it will tell you that none of the political party that does not has a a tribal outlook, because we want to have probably Jubilee, which enjoys majority of its votes from Mount Kenya region. Then go back to the UDA that is coming up. It is to no doubt that it is doing majority of its vote from the Rift Valley. So that is why you hear people singing that we want the president and the deputy president to work together in anticipation of the whatever will come out in 2022. So we may have a lot of stories that may revolve around. So at least, of course, everyone will try to build his party to appear like it has some national outlook. But then, at the end of the day, our political parties are purely based on tribe. That is why you hear people say Kenyan politics are tribal, or they purely center on mashinani. So if your political party does not enjoy popularity in our region, then you have no reason of coming to campaign here, unless you come with a friend who comes from this region. That is why if Kalonzo were to go and campaign in Rift Valley, he has at least to appear a friend to Ruto. If Ruto wants to go to Kisumu today, he must appear to be a friend to Raila. Regardless of whether his party has some followers in Kisumu, he'll have to appear to be a friend to Raila if you want to score anything.
So those ties still have to be there?
They have to be there. Okay,
and looking back where it all started, because the fallout between KANU and KADU, it was following the death of Pio Gamapito, then at that time. So again, when parties, coalitions break, looking at the history of parties coming together, and then, okay, so they do not agree for one reason or the other. And then Kibaki, after the coalition was formed, the NAC government was formed. Then later in 2005, it broke because he did not honor the memorandum of understanding that was there at that time. So the question of loyalty in these coalitions then also comes to play.
Like I said earlier, the formation of coalitions are informed on some short-lived interests. At the same time, we cannot say that coalitions are void of memorandum. There are memorandum that are drawn at formation of each coalition. So when we have formed a coalition and we have been able to win the government, and we are now entering into a coalition government, whatever informs the breakdown of a coalition is more on frustrations of certain parties. Our interests have not been catered for. For example, let me give you a history of the 2002 coalition that was formed between Kibaki and Raila. Kibaki and Raila, when they had to form a coalition, they wanted to bring down KANU. That was being fronted
had been in power for
Uhuru.
So long.
Yes. And Moi was seeming to endorse, not seeming actually, he endorsed Uhuru to take over the leadership of KANU and become the flag bearer. So when Raila felt that he had been shortchanged with Uhuru, he ran ahead and with his party, the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party of that time. And then they formed a coalition with Kibaki, who won the NAC, that is the National Alliance Party of Kenya. So they formed a coalition, that was the Rainbow Coalition in 2002.
Yeah.
When they formed a coalition, there is that one thing that was so much pronounced in the coalition, that Raila was become the Prime Minister. But and the next thing was they would immediately change the constitution. But when they took over the leadership, Raila was shortchanged. There was no Prime Minister positions. So they became bitter. So the fallout of the coalition was now as a result of frustrations of some kingpins or the big fishes in the coalition. They felt that the interest was not being rewarded. Others, minor people, came in the coalition with the interest of probably appointment and other managerial positions.
Wanting positions still in the government.
When they get frustrated, they start now running away and now they start now forming a different wing of the coalition. So that is how, in 2002, after the coalition, they fell out purely because Raila felt was frustrated that his interest of getting the prime minister position, which was just to be built somewhere within the constitution, but it didn't exist. So because his interest was frustrated, then they fell out with Kibaki.
Okay, and looking at 2002, it goes in our history as one of the times when all Kenyans came together, because the National Alliance, Rainbow Coalition, then had former President Mwai Kibaki, it had former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, it had Wiper leader Kalonzo, it had Ngilu, it had Wamalwa. It showed a representation, basically, of different communities coming together to form one alliance. So against the Moi regime, which had been there for 24 years. Yeah. So this was the one time that Kenyans actually were at the same place. All Kenyans, they were resonating together and agreeing on one accord. So then, why is it so hard for Kenya to go back to what it was in 2002? Or this was just a fight, a fight against former President Moi?
Yes, the coalitions seem to carry the national outlook, but then the main point in the memorandum were they centered on Kenyans, because like I've just said, that coalition was more informed on who was frustrated by Kanu. All along, Raila probably was thinking that he would be supported by Moi. But then few days to the 2002 elections, Raila was shortchanged by Moi. So as much as he went there, the other guys who came up, Akina Kalonzo, Akina Wamalwa, Charity Gilo, all those guys, if I'm asked to make a judgment, I think they carried their personal interest at heart. That is why immediately after they formed the government, they started falling away from each other.
So you say that the intention at that time was just to face out the Moi regime, and it was not for the public. Interest. So it was not merely for the interest of Kenyans.
Not at all.
Even though it appeared like Kenya was united at that point.
Yes, and the mistake again we keep on making is that the imagination that because Raila is a Luo and he is in a coalition, Luos are there. Because Kalonzo is a Kamba and he's in a coalition, Kambas are there. I think unless we have a coalition that discusses and they build a memorandum based on the interest of a community, but not an individual, because Kalonzo does not really carry the interest of Kambas by himself. He is more likely to pronounce his personal interest than the Kamba community interest. So the fact that Kalonzo was there, being a Kamba, Gilo was there, Kibaki was there, and other guys like Wamalo were there.
It felt like all communities were
involved. It appeared like all communities were there. But we ask ourselves, does an individual really carry the interest of a community? Because unless we have a memorandum that mentions and says that this is a memorandum based on Kambas are farmers, the interests are being catered in our coalition in this manner. Kikuyus are farmers, they plant tea. How are the interests of Kikuyus being catered in this? The Maasais are brought on board. They are pastoralists. They're in the coalition, and the interests of the pastoralist communities are catered in this way.
So we can't say that tribes are represented by merely having one person, because they could be having their special personal interests.
Not at all.
Okay, we're taking a short break here on Bottom Line KE. Today on the show we are talking about coalition party politics. We'll be back. Don't go too far. Welcome back to the program. You're watching Bottom Line KE right here on Look Up TV. And today in the program, we're talking about coalition party politics. With me on set is Patrick Mwenda, who is a youth leader, and joining us right now, Onchari Oyeyo, who is a political scientist. So Onchari, I will start with you. Just before the break, we were talking about how 2002 elections defined Kenya differently, because years of ethnicity and tribal lines had been put on a pause, because the coalition government at that time, it represented different communities. We saw Kibaki, Raila, Ngilu, the late Wamalwa coming together to form the government. And then after that, we went straight back to the ethnic lines from the referendum that just came soon after in 2005.
Factory settings.
So what was different in 2002 that we can't have right now?
Well, number one, thank you so much for inviting me here. Nobody has said we cannot have that. We can have that. And in fact, I think the president, that is His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, set the stage for a replication of what took place in 2002. Now, look, 2002 was what we call the climax of the struggle against dictatorship under the presidency of Daniel Toroitich arap Moi, a vicious dictator who crushed, you know, the economic base of this country, who oppressed politicians, who transformed this country from what he'd inherited from the first president to a banana republic. So
it was a new dawn for Kenyans.
Yes, Kenyans were eager to transform, to transition to something different. So it held a little bit of anxiety and hope at the same time. So when Moi decided to pick Uhuru Kenyatta, who was an unknown quantity, and give him KANU, there was disenchantment. There was an element of dissatisfaction. There was anger. There was frustration. And to some degree, there was confusion. So these guys were united by a common denominator of rebellion against what they considered to be a poor choice to take the country to the next level. You remember before that, Raila had tried something else, which was getting into KANU, hoping that he would wink Moi into giving him leadership.
Yep.
Now, Moi was not very keen on helping someone through rigging to take over the presidency. You remember when it was clear Kibaki was winning, the likes of, the current president, who was working with Ruto and other guys, expected Moi to pull, you know, some hard trick, which could again bring votes to them to have Uhuru Kenyatta sworn in as president. To the last minute, when Uhuru was conceding, they actually expected Moi to do something. And a good portion of Kenyans were ready for Moi to do some, you know, some mischievous trick, which could have now led to serious chaos, because they were not ready to see a rigged election, not in 2002. But then again, you know, Moi was very wise, having been in power for so long. He read the signs of the times. He could see the kind of tension and the kind of pressure Kenyans had brought to bear on the election. They wanted something different, and they trusted their lives with Kibaki. So he said, no, I'm not going to do it, to interfere. So Kibaki was sworn in. So the uniting factor was the poor choice which was made by the outgoing president. And we headed to 2022 with a president who I consider very smart politically. Obviously, he has crashed the economy. I've said that before. Politically, Uhuru is very smart. When he discovered that the chaos that could be brought by NASA could not make it possible for him to govern post-2018, he brought Raila on board. And he knew by bringing Raila on board, Musyoka, Musalia, and Weta could not go anywhere. They actually had to just either get confused around or follow who.
So that was one way of avoiding the harsh animosity in the country,
yes,
as has been over the years.
Well, to me, Uhuru was trying to create a conducive climate or weather or whatever atmosphere for him to govern. He did it. That was a master stroke. He did it very well. And of course, Raila came in believing, you know what, this guy is going to endorse me and then I'll become president. You know, we'll bring in the deep state, so-called deep state, and then 2022 for me, it will be just a walk in the park to State House. Obviously, that is not going to happen. And so he contained everyone. As we speak now, Musalia expects to be made president. Gideon has the money and a little bit of the name, but he doesn't have the votes. So he expects some magic to happen and make him president. Musyoka, who is always a running mate, expects to be, you know, given the presidency because he's a senior politician at a senior council. Raila, who has made it possible for Uhuru to govern for 5 years now almost, expects to be rewarded. So all these guys are now with bowels waiting for something from the president. He has done it so well. Politically, the guys are genius. So he can get to 2022 and say, you know what, you guys, Kenya has to be peaceful. You go to the ballot, whoever wins becomes president. And then that is it.
So is that in a way just postponing chaos?
No, no, it won't be like that, because if the ground is fair and we go to the elections and there's no rigging, and Kenyans can see, you know, at this point now we can be able to see that these are fair elections and unfair election. There'll be no chaos. I'll tell you something that I've always had an issue with the BBI. Africans always behave like they're fools, but they're not. When we bring in BBI and they decide to create an enlarged executive, we're simply trying to say we cannot coexist as a people. So we have to create positions for everyone to be satisfied. That is not the point. If I'm the only presidential candidate from my community, and then this guy is also vying and you're vying, and then we have a fair election and you win and we lose, we'll support you. You'll not see chaos. Kenyans fight when they see an element of unfairness in elections. So BBI is the wrong prescription for the problems the country is facing. But for now, that is what we've been able to come up with. Whoever came up with it, that is it. In fact, now BBI treats symptoms and not the disease itself. No.
Okay, so then Kenyans, to achieve, what should political parties be made of? Because if all communities want to feel included, then should political parties have factor in all communities, or what should exactly be the ideologies of political parties?
Okay. Of course, truth be said, everyone would be very happy if we form political parties that are purely showing some national outlook, and they are really considering all the elements that any community in this country would want to feel represented. But then, for us to have fair political parties, unless we get to a point where we form parties that are purely pro what Mwananchi is saying, but not pro the leaders of the parties, because we have had a lot of issues in terms of political parties and how we form coalitions, because we focus on personal interest on the leadership of parties rather than parties being formed on pro-Mwananchi agenda. Because that is where we get it wrong. Anytime we form political parties to act as tools to advance the interest of an individual. Because history has said that anytime we have a political party that's coming up, it is informed of something. And more often than not, it will be as a result of frustrations of an individual. For example, let's just have an history of how the 2007 elections took place and the coalitions formed during that time. There was this party, the ODM Kenya and the ODM. Why did they had to form ODM and leave ODM Kenya? Because someone was feeling is being shortchanged. And then there was a lot of controversies on who becomes the flag bearer. So ODM was purely formed on the basis of Raila should become a flag bearer, of presidential flag bearer of a party. But because Kalonzo and his friends were not willing to give it, that is why they ended up forming the ODM, and they left ODM Kenya. So in that sense, it will tell you that political parties are not formed to represent the interests of the Mwananchi. They are basically formed to present the interest of an individual or a certain group of social class that the big people in the country. If only we can get to a point where we are forming political parties that are representing Mwananchi, that is the time we can have at least reduction of animosity, and then also when we move on to forming coalitions, we will form coalitions that are now also pro-Mwananchi. But then we notice that we are forming coalitions that are not based on what Mwananchi want, but we want them to act as tools to propel us to certain realization of our own interests.
Okay, so then, and where is the problem exactly? Because are Kenyans ready to be part of political parties that stand for specific ideologies, or they first just want to feel included even before anything? Yes, Onchari.
I think there's an element of some shift. Kenyans are shifting, but it's going to take time. What we call socialization is a process, and the culture can be deeply entrenched, especially if it's been running for a long period of time. So at the moment, the number of Kenyans who want to insist on what we call a party platform is very small. Even guys who've gone to school tend to think along tribal lines. As a tribe, we need our own vehicle. That is how tribal political parties get formed. and our leaders are not even helping. Because I'm told a few days ago when the president went to Mombasa, he met Joho and Kingi, and then he advised them to actually come up with their own political party. So obviously that is going to be something that is sort of a tribal vehicle for the coastal tribes.
One of the coast area.
Yeah. And you saw what happened in Jubilee. Murathe was everywhere telling the deputy president, if you're not comfortable in Jubilee, go out and form your own political party. Now, if you go to a developed political democracy like the United States, you have two political parties, the major ones, of course.
Yeah.
And then the platforms for the two parties are solid. For example, there is a party which stands for limited government, that is the Republican Party, and the other one for, you know, an enlarged with social safety nets and all that, like social security and stuff like that, the Democrats, the Democratic Party. If you stand for gay rights and all those things, you find your space within the liberal wing of the Democratic Party. And, you know, along those lines. So the moment Kenyans have this mindset of distinguishing ideas, and then we get parties which can espouse all these platforms, then we can stop this idea of running around and forming small parties. And that is why the idea of UDA fielding candidates in every election is very good. That is how you form a party. You take it to the ground. You don't take it to places where you feel you are a strong person or you have supporters. No. Get a party, make it popular, take it to every part of the country, make sure you have supporters everywhere. You don't have to win, you just need supporters. And then from there, you can have a party that has a national outlook, which means the space can accommodate all sorts of Kenyans. And then you come up with an ideology which accommodates Kenyans. And that is where now the idea of the hustler
narrative
comes in. The hustler identity accommodates people beyond tribe. If you're Luhya and you feel like for the longest time you've been disenfranchised, you've been left out, you can come in here and fight for your rights from within the hustler movement. So the hustler identity with UDA now creates this national umbrella that can accommodate Kenyans from all tribes. Now that is, it's not like it's perfect, but that is the direction we should take. And then we need to be very, very strict when it comes to registration of political parties. If you don't meet some kind of baseline,
a threshold, yeah, true,
in terms of membership from all parts of the country, especially tribal, you don't get registered. That is how we can discourage this nonsense of tribal outfits. Like, oh, you know, I'm a Kisii, now I have to come up with 4 people which can accommodate my people. We should stop that.
Okay.
Yeah, so that if I feel like I'm strong enough, I go to UDA, I fight for my space within that. So that when I walk around, I'm part of a national outfit. So we can now, you know, break down and destroy this monster of tribalism.
And as even as multipartism is good because it is democracy, but do Kenyans need the multipartism? If then parties are formed along tribal lines, has multipartism then just divided Kenyans as opposed to uniting as we thought at first it would?
Well, the idea of multipartism probably was informed on giving a platform for all Kenyans to script their own ideas and have their own agendas in each party. But then, if we look at it like, how did Kenyans dissect multipartism and how have they advanced the agenda of multipartism so that we now trickle down to formation of coalitions of different parties? Kenyans went ahead now to insert the brain of multipartism, because we formed the multipartism state in our country because we wanted each and every person to come on board and have their own way of expressing what they feel is good for the country. So that at least we have members of Ford Asili, we have the members of Ford Kenya, we have members of KANU and other different political parties, that they would come up, yes, we are not being accommodated in the KANU. Can we sit down and script our own ideas, and that gives a national outlook probably, so that at least we sell our ideas to the Kenyans and they buy it and then they give us the government, they vote us in as a government. That was the branding of multipartyism.
Okay.
But then as we went ahead, I don't know what happens, whether Kenyans changed, took a U-turn on the same, and we now turned multipartyism to a political tool. I mean, to a tribal tool. We have slowly sold multipartyism to be a tribal tool that any party that is formed is possibly or to some extent showing some tribal
We'll identify it with a certain community.
a certain community. That is why we cannot mention of this party of ANC without ANC and from Kenya of Wetangula without talking about the Luhya unity. That has to come out. Very many people have to view it in that perspective. So we have really changed multipartyism to the wrong thing. I wish Kenyans would come back and really resonate with the very first idea of multipartyism.
Okay.
I think it is not something bad. It was not something bad to begin with. And then the problem came in how we dissected it and how we conceived the idea of multipartyism to advance our personal interest rather than the interest of the country.
Okay. And even looking at Tanzania, Tanzania, they have over 100 tribes.
Yeah.
As opposed to our 43, 44 tribes in Kenya. So if they have many more tribes than us, then shouldn't they be having this issue more than we have it, but they do not? So how is the approach so different? Yes, Anchari.
Yeah, I think he has made a wonderful point on how we, misinterpreted and lost the whole idea of multipartyism. Coming back to Tanzania, obviously, as you've said, has more than 120 tribes, but it goes back to the philosophy of the founding father of Tanzania as a republic, that is Mwalimu Nyerere. He came to power, and then, this was a selfless man who felt that the dream of building a strong Tanzania was bigger than his personal wealth. You cannot compare Nyerere to someone like Kenyatta, who felt like, after the exit of the colonial masters, his job was to get all the land they had left behind. So Mzee planted the seeds of greed that actually destroyed this nation right from the word go. That is something people don't say. Yes, people don't say that. So because of the nature of the philosophy on which Tanzania was founded, the clamor for selfish ambition and selfish interests is so limited, to a point where if you come out as a selfish and corrupt politician, you're actually pushed out of Chama cha Mapinduzi. And that is the basis on which Tanzanians have gotten to learn to live together as a people, not as tribes. Now, the reason as to why multipartyism broke down and fell apart is selfishness and fairness. That is the very reason why these guys had to even run away from KANU. If KANU had democracy, whereby once you've beaten, you feel like you've been beaten fairly, these guys couldn't have exited, apart from the few, dissatisfied ones, the greedy ones who, just like in the US, if you're a presidential candidate and if, you lose the nomination, you endorse the person who wins, because the process is by its very nature very fair. That is the thing. You
don't run away and say, I'm buying as well.
I've been mistreated, these guys have stolen my votes. So KANU didn't have this kind of fairness. These guys had to push for another platform, they felt, another house they felt could espouse this fairness.
Okay.
That is how these parties were done were born. And then because of now the selfishness, the greed, there was disintegration. Ford broke into Ford Asili, there was Ford Kenya, down further the line there was Ford People, and all these, the DP of Kibaki, all these things came up because of unfairness. Now, if we have to actually build a lasting democracy that we can hand over to our kids and kids can like that, it has to be founded on fairness. Democracy has to play out as it should. Let the playground or playing field be fair, so that when someone is beaten, they know, I lost because I had not done enough. That is why Trump, with his maverick character, came into the Republican Party. He mobilized the way he knows because he's a showman, and they gave him the ticket. He won the election. So democracy allows for even the most mediocre fellows to compete, and if they win, they win. Yeah,
the people decide.
Yes, but you realize KANU was tightly controlled by the president of the time, that is Moi, And there were guys who were the blue-eyed boys who could be given tickets here and there, sometimes unfairly. So if you didn't have the KANU ticket, you could not win. That is why guys had to exit. Yeah.
Okay, and looking even at the Political Parties Act of 2011, so if we're trying to tackle coalition party politics, then the coalitions, they're formed with parties. So again, how parties are formed, the leadership in those parties, what the parties stand for. Are parties that are formed in Kenya keen to ensure that all these are factored in?
Now, before I respond on that, allow me to mention something that my friend has said, that we rarely say that Kenyatta took us down the wrong direction, because we don't speak about Kenyatta because we want to be politically right. That's a problem we have in our country. Then another thing that you just mentioned about the philosophy of Mwalimu Nyerere, I remember sometimes back there is a time Nyerere said that Kenya is a man hit a man society, and we rebuked him by saying that Tanzania is a man hit nothing society. A man hit nothing society, but up to date, everyone is happy about the ruling Tanzania. People are very happy. And because there is no this sort of tribal issues in Tanzania. Like now, we already have the vice president in Tanzania, and there is no one who knows he comes from which community. There is no one like who mentioned about a community, a tribe, he comes from this region. We just needed a Tanzania to fill in the gap of Suluhu, who had risen up to the presidency. Now, going back to how we do it in our country, our political parties, like I've severally repeated it, how we are forming and how we are drawing the agendas of our political parties, to some point they look so sweet when you are scripting them down. But back at the back of the curtains, what are we advancing? It is purely on personal interest. Me, I would say that our political parties are centered on personal interests. Of course, when we are drawing our manifestos and our agendas about different political parties, we sugarcoat them to appear so sweet.
So theoretically, it makes total sense, but the implementation is not there.
It is not that at all. That is why I think we need to go back to our fabrics, moral fabrics, and try to draw our political parties. We kill that self-centeredness of our political agendas. If we can do that, and then we draw our political parties based on what Kenyans want. Let's listen from what Kenyans want. As much as I want to form Wiper in Ukambani, are we forming it to advance the agenda of the Ukambani people and the Kikuyu people and the Luo people, or we want to form it so that we have a bargaining power in the national cake when it comes to formation of different coalitions? Yeah.
Okay, and now given that 2022 is a few months away, this period, do you think it's enough for Kenyans to turn their attitude around and say that we're only going to support parties that are going to put our interests at the forefront? Do we have enough time to do that?
No, we don't. There's no time left. And then, let me fault the Jubilee government again for another mistake they made. When they came to power, they were so scared to a point where they actually crushed the civil society, which was being given money. Of course, it was full of cartels as well, who could get money from donors and then, diverted the money to their private accounts for their own projects. But then they were performing a very vital duty of civic education, which has now gone down to zero. As we speak now, there's no one who's trying to help Kenyans understand anything. Kenyans are at a point where they are actually on their own in the political wilderness. They could not even get someone to tell them that the ideas in BBI were mainly the views of a few elites. There's not even a single Kenyan who said we need the number of members of parliament increased. They didn't say that. Kenyans were crying, punguzeni nini, mizigo. But then we were given BBI, which was giving us an additional 70 MPs. No Kenyan said that, I can tell you. I can bet my life on that.
Well, there was public participation.
So to say.
That is...
Yes, I spent my time and gone around. There's no Kenyan who said we want additional MPs. Actually, they wanted them reduced. Yeah. So, we don't have civic education. Kenyans are not being enlightened on the direction they should take when it comes to political participation. They cannot even come out and demand what they think is right of their political parties. That is why, again, at some point, as we approach 2022, you will see us running to the tribal parties as usual. If you come from the house of Mulembe, you will just hold for space either within ANC or Ford Kenya. If you come from our Ukambani brothers, you will fight for space within Wiper.
Okay.
If you come from the Rift Valley, most likely you've created your small space within UDA. If you come from Kanu is dead. We shouldn't even talk about that. If you come from Mount Kenya, most likely you're now working very hard to get into Moses Kuria's party or Mwangi Kinjuri's, the service party, or whichever it's called, or whichever vehicle the president will come up with. That is what we have. So as we speak now, the only political party which actually gets close to having a national outlook is UDA, as new as it is, because you saw them field the candidates in Matungu, in Kabuchai.
So the fielding of candidates for you shows that
it means
it
means the vision you have captures the entire nation.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there is something the Secretary General of Jubilee has been selling to Kenyans, which is very backward. He comes out and tells us, you know, as a political party, we've decided to pull out our candidate from a particular contest because we're supporting the other party in the spirit of the handshake and all that kind of nonsense. Political competition does not mean enmity. When me and you vie, doesn't mean we're enemies. If Jubilee fields a candidate somewhere and ODM fields a candidate somewhere and they compete and then we get a winner, so long as it's fair, that is not a reason to create enmity. But he's been selling this nonsense that if two parties working together compete for position, they're not working together.
Okay.
So we should move away from that.
Okay.
Yes.
So as you conclude, I just want to pick your thoughts on these coalitions. So when NASA coalition, which composed of ANC, Ford, Wiper, and ODM, and now there is a new party that has been formed by the ANC, Wiper, yes, the New Kenya. So then there's a possibility of ODM coming together with the Deputy President's party, UDA. So if that happens, or if there's a possibility of that happening, then are we advancing as a country, given that when this political party calls out the other party for wrongdoing and corruption allegations, and then but with time, because it will be favorable next time to come together, then they do that. So are we advancing as a country by doing the same?
Well, I don't think we are doing any justice to ourselves. If we sit down, after some time, we've seen ODM and its courts insult the UDA for some time. Yeah. We have also seen the version of the DP and his court about the ODM. Now, the surprise now comes in few days to the elections or a few months to election, the narrative is slowly changing. And now we are left wondering, whatever they were telling us, what is lies, or they were just trying to make us hate them.
It was a political game.
Yes, they are just playing their own game. So it is now, we are now left to wonder whether, even if they form a coalition, will it be pro-Kenyans, or they will just be shelving their own personal differences so that they can achieve something in common, and then later on they run away, because we are not even sure whether that coalition will run for 5 years. It may run past one or few months past the election on 2022, because if we follow back our history, coalitions don't run few months after elections are over. And then
once they achieve the purpose, then
we are
that's
done. We start now having differences and people run away. So I don't think whether we should start now agitating for coalition at the moment. Let's have a party which has got its own ideas. Let them sell to Kenyans. If Kenyans buy, fine. If they don't buy, then let them buy the other ideas, without having now to bring people that have been haters of one another for some time, and then we believe, because now they have formed a coalition, all of them are good, and we start selling them as their saints.
Okay, so we have to conclude the show. We have come to the end of Bottom Line KE right here on Look Up TV. Our sign language interpreter has been Josephine Ouko. I am Nancy Nelima. Thank you for watching.